you're all here for. And it's interesting that the conversation before this was also about independent news creators. I wonder if we've found a little bit of a clique for ourselves. But I hope not, and I hope the conversation can be wider than that. I'm going to set some context, and then I'm going to sort of open it up to Sophia, because she's got lots of things to say. Sophia is an author, a journalist, a content creator. I don't know if she wants to sound that old, but she's sort of seen as the one who created the TikTok idea for newsrooms. Shall I call you a veteran, or will that sort of sting a bit?
It's been nearly 6 years. Oh,
You're a...
No.
Is there a button there, maybe?
I don't know. They'll bring me another one.
Okay,
I'll speak loud for now. You can hear me, can't you? Yeah.
while we wait for a mic to reach Sophia,
Turn it off or on? This is where I go super boomer. How do I turn it on?
I was
Hello?
good at something. 6 years.
Yeah.
So she is the veteran, and we're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to be an individual content creator. I'm Mitali Mukherjee. I'm director at the Reuters Institute. Some of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years explores exactly that, what news content creators look like. But I think it's a bit, there's many sort of lines and threads to draw from there. Some of it comes from the recent US elections, where podcasts were certainly a thing, and they were the center of the conversation for many people, the deciding factor around how votes went for particular communities and groups. Then there's individual content creators who sometimes have nothing to do with the news, but then happen to chance upon it and then work on news. And then there's journalists who have made the conscious decision to step away from mainstream news as we know it and created spaces of themselves. There's a couple of sort of good things and bad things very quickly. I know that sounds quite crude, but just to sort of separate it. In some of the research we've done at the Reuters Institute, including in the digital news report, and our author is sitting here, Nick Newman, there he is, around news creators, is what we've seen across most markets is a tendency for it to be mostly a male content creator. They're the most popular ones. A tendency for it to be quite partisan in terms of its content, so either really left or really right in terms of the content that you're seeing. And of course, that it's mostly commentary and not that much groundwork reporting. These are some of the sort of the negatives. Some of the positives are the fact that these are creators who are clearly reaching out to younger audiences. So they're making a connection there. They've got very, very high views, and they're doing this on an individual base. So there's a lot of connection that they're being able to build with audiences. And the fact that they're doing things which are quite interesting, so they're obviously resonating with an audience. So there's those two sides of it. Of course, Sophia has talked about the vertical video, which I hope everyone in this room now knows about, and if you don't, here's your chance. But Sophia, I'm going to sort of start with a really broad question, because that feeds off something you and I were talking about earlier. The first one being, is it different for young audiences when you say the word news? Does it mean something quite different to them than it did to the dinosaur generation?
You can see when you work in a newsroom making social media journalism that younger audiences have a wider definition of what is considered to be newsworthy. And then interestingly, if you look at the differences between the kind of content that seems to be platformed a lot by newsrooms when they make, for example, a TikTok or a general vertical video, the topics that they tend to cover sometimes diverge considerably from what content creators in the news space, be they journalists, be they unaffiliated with news media, what they choose to make. So you'll often see them take on stories that may cover, for example, social justice in a way a bit more than a newsroom might. It's wider definitions, and I don't think we necessarily call it even news, maybe. I don't know. It is all content. We're all in the same space.
There is one term, though, that people associate with what they see as news, and perhaps not with the best emotion, which is mainstream media.
Yeah.
Does that one ring differently for a younger audience?
I also don't know if it's young or if it's just digital, because when I first started making this kind of content, the platforms that I'm talking about, TikTok and Instagram, they're my main focus platforms, they were how you were going to engage young people. They're now how you engage all people. Like, the age demographics have changed on both of those platforms, and they've gone wider, and it's not merely about reaching young people anymore for me. It's just about how do I reach a wide digital audience that, yes, is very inclusive of young people, but is now inclusive of other age demographics. But to the point about mainstream news and mainstream media and how we're increasingly hearing it, the Oxford English Dictionary attests the most recent use of the phrase mainstream media, mainstream news, to the 1980s, and it was used by people on the left in the US. And I think that's fascinating, because would you say that is how the phrase mainstream media and mainstream news is used today? I'm not so sure. And I want to tell you a story about something that happened 2 or 3 years ago at a literature festival. I was, at that point, at Vice News. I had been at the BBC for 4 years before that. If you said to me, am I a mainstream media journalist? I probably would have said, yeah. You know, why wouldn't I be? I'm affiliated to these legacy news brands. I must be. We're at this festival, and we're in the green room for the festival, and someone recognizes me and goes, I love your stuff, it's so interesting. Oh, thank you, that's really nice. And we start chatting. It doesn't take very long for me to realize I do not think this man and I share a lot of values or opinions. And he hated the BBC. You know, he was very, very, very angry about it. And at one point...
Were you in a room with Trump?
No. But at one point, he said something to me that made me think, you know, I'm a journalist. And he looked really crestfallen. And he had assumed I wasn't part of mainstream media because of the format he knew me from. Because he had only seen me in TikTok videos or Instagram videos, he assumed I wasn't a journalist. And he assumed I wasn't part of, like, the mainstream media rubric. I think that's changing now, the more that journalists and news publishers have gone on these platforms, but I've never forgotten that interaction.
Let me lob sort of a couple of devil's advocate questions at you, and, you know, take them on, and let's see where we go with it. The first being that one of the points of contention for news organizations is it isn't our job to be on sort of platforms such as this, on Instagram or TikTok. It's supply chain. So we create the content, someone picks it up, and what they're essentially doing is remixing what we've gone to great lengths to create, and then they're taking it forward. So let them take it forward. What's the point of being, on these platforms? And the second one is the other bone of contention, which is, well, what's the point anyway? Because the algorithms will bury us. So should we go to any effort to do this when essentially TikTok or Instagram will decide this isn't a thing because politics or news, or as we define it broadly, isn't a thing?
Okay,
So
let me do the second one first. The journalists and non-media affiliated content creators who've talked about stories in the news have been going viral with news content as long as these platforms have been around. So the premise that we can't do high quality, highly engaged storytelling on these platforms is not true. That does not mean algorithms are not hostile to the structures and often the values of newsrooms. We know that algorithms want to drive rage bait. As newsrooms, well, plenty of newsrooms kind of do put out rage bait, but the algorithms may try and force us to frame things in a certain way we are not comfortable with. That being said, there are lots of people, myself included, who basically try and game the algorithm and try and find this sweet spot where we're taking the strategies of content creation but marrying them with editorial standards and values that we hold to be sacrosanct. To your first point, which is why should news media be there? I mean, you're just not going to be seen if you're not there. If audiences are increasingly moving anywhere, you have to start giving them the news and information there. For me, it's that basic. I was so lucky that in my job at the BBC, the first week was spent with me reading all of the audience research. That's what my boss told me to do. Just sit and read all our audience research. Because it was like, you won't know how to reach our existing audience or widen and grow our audience if you aren't aware of the research that already exists, like the research in the Digital News Report, and equally like internal research that the BBC has done. And I think a lot of the time, journalists haven't done that work. And that's not necessarily journalists' fault. If you haven't got management saying to you, you need to know your audiences back to front before you start giving them news, that's sort of where not the supply chain, as you said, but that's where that's where things start going wrong, because you haven't got the right information to start putting out what people need.
Just as context, I want to add that the Digital News Report, which now spans almost 50 countries, finds that across the board for audiences, it's almost a one-third split, which could be changing a little bit, which essentially means that most of them go to the news via gateways like search. So the good old Google bar and looking for what they're interested in. The second is a news organization or a news website, but it's shrinking. And the third is social media platforms. And increasingly, just as Sophia pointed out, across age groups, it is video that is hugely popular in terms of how people consume it. The duration may change, but video is the one that is the preferred format for audiences. Walk us through your storytelling and formation process, Sophia. So if you were to pick up a particular piece of news, and I was thinking of an interesting example being the recent tariff decisions, where I saw a stream of TikToks coming from a lot of mainstream news media, and it was quite interesting to see the comparison and how they were approaching the story, which sort of ranged from pedantic to being quite interesting and experimental. How would you workshop that story, and what do you think would be a really engaging way of telling that story to your audience?
So I work with the 3 I's when I make content. So it's instinct, insight, and impact. This is when I'm very specifically working in a newsroom context. And oftentimes, if I'm making content that is perhaps about original journalism, as opposed to me explaining something in the news where I haven't had to do original reporting. 3 I's. So you begin with instinct. You hear a story, and for this one in particular, let's imagine I was here with a business reporter in the United States, someone who's probably reported on tariffs for a very long time, who is still mind-boggled by what is happening. And I would want to see them, I would want to know what their instinct is based on their years of experience and their expertise. What is their reaction to what's going on? What is the sort of journalistic investigative hunch that now develops following what's gone on? Then it's the insights. Have you checked search data? Have you checked what's already going viral on platforms? What is it that the audience is already telling us that they're needing? What is it that they are telling us they're curious about, that news media, we are in the best position to do it, can do high quality storytelling to give them the information that they need. And then the last one is impact. It doesn't necessarily work for every single story, but I think it does work for most. How is it that finally this piece of content you can make can be distinctive and perform well on an algorithm against your competitors? This third one has risen in importance over the past 6 years because this space is so oversaturated now. Back when I was an early adopter of TikTok, there was no competition really. There was very little competition. Now I am competing, if I were to make news content, with all the news publishers that are now on there and all of the news creators and all the journalists, as we have proliferated. So I would want to see this business reporter craft an interesting video that should actually be very connected to whatever reporting they've been doing. Have they written an article for their news site? And are they publishing every time they do a text piece? Are they also publishing a vertical video? That is what I'd be telling them to do. And that video, you should see them in that video. They should be presenting their own work. And there are a few choices here. Does that video go on the news publisher's account? Does that video go on the individual reporter's account? Do 2 videos go out on both? At Vice, we did the both scenario. and would get, you know, millions of extra eyeballs on our journalism. So that's sort of the process I would walk through. And from those different things I mentioned, like the instinct, the insights, the right angle sort of appears.
Along with the reality that there are a large number of audiences worldwide now consuming news via video, Sophia, there is also the reality, as research points to it, that a lot of this content is quite partisan. And that's not just for America, where I know every conversation that is about content creators or podcasts leads to Joe Rogan, but it's happening in other countries as well, whether it's South Africa or India, the country that I belong to. How do news organizations navigate a situation where they're just not constructed to be partisan, and for good reason? And how do they navigate a situation where they're also not required to or cannot take on clear sponsorships or partnerships, something that individual content creators do quite often?
Well, I mean, news publishers carry ads. I don't know about the latter point. Obviously, yes, if you are a staff journalist at a news org, you can't do those things. But, well, I do think it's deeply challenging, and I do think that one of the biggest problems as well in newsrooms is who even gets to make the content in the first place, who is platformed. So many newsrooms, you know, really quite depressingly, are not amplifying reporters' formidable investigative journalism as video and encourage them to become confident on video. This stuff's quite hard. All the people that want to make a video and have never done it before, it's quite scary. I don't know if anyone here sort of wants to make content and never has done, because there's that little moment where you're just thinking, oh my goodness, I can't deal with. I'm thinking about all the pushback I might get from making this content. It's all quite scary, and you're trying to think of all those things, knowing, as you've just described, you're in this partisan environment. I deal with it by putting out what I think is just as valued online, which is not only opinion, of course, I'm not denying that, deep dives, analysis, and being given the space and being given the understanding that, hey, this 90-second vertical video that you're going to make needs to be sort of as well researched and impactful as like the news article that you're doing. And I think if we bring deep dives and analysis with assertion and, you know, journalistic rigor, that does stand up to all of this opinion content. That's what I'm saying to you, like, anecdotally, as having done this for 6 years. That's why my content performs well, because I'm not there giving my opinion either.
For a news organization, and this is a quick one from me before we open to the audience, that hasn't started this journey yet, what's a good way to start? What's a good way to upskill your journalists to create an environment where the story that goes on TikTok is of high, if not equal importance to what's going on your website?
Yeah, this is a good question, and I always think about like, raise your hand here if you do work at a publisher. You're not a freelancer. You're a staff journalist. Okay, nice mix in the room. Great. You possibly have internal comms newsletters that go out from very senior leadership within the organisation, and once a week they might say, here are the stories that. Here are the awards our newsroom won this week. Here's something fancy someone did. Here are the stories that we did that got, you know, all of these views on the website, etc. If you're only rewarding traditional journalistic formats in those kinds of spaces, and you're not there saying, and well done for this video that got millions of views, and treating it as being just as valuable, that got all the views as well as the channel that night or the article that morning, suddenly you're diminishing this hierarchy that actually might be quite deeply embedded in a news organisation. And so everyone here, the next time you read one of these newsletters at your news org, think about what kind of content seems to be praised and rewarded. If you don't see the kind of journalism you believe in as being praised or rewarded, you're not going to have career progression, and you're probably going to leave.
I have a quick 1A before we open up for questions to your question, which is for the gathering here that is a staff reporter or belongs to a mainstream media organization. Have you posted on TikTok any of your stories? Have you or on Instagram or any social media content on vertical video? Raise your hands if you have.
That's great.
That's
so
great.
much more than a couple of years ago. Yeah.
We got a good room. Okay, we're going to open up for questions with a very embarrassing admission from me, which is that I've forgotten to wear my lenses. So I'm going to squint, and if I know you, I'm sorry that I don't point to you by name, but just raise your hands, and we'll try and get a mic to you, and we can get started. Is there someone at the back with the hand raised that I can't quite tell? And there's someone here. Could we get a mic to the gentleman on this side, please? I think there's someone at the back, but maybe there's... We'll start here and then we'll get to the person at the back.
There's one right at the back.
Maybe you should do the navigating since I'm working half blind.
Yeah.
Hi, friend.
Hi.
So I'm V. Spear from Under the Desk News, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about what you said before about staff journalists beginning their careers on TikTok, and should that be a benefit to the newsrooms that they work in, or do you have any suggestions for them on how they could work their contract so that they maintain their IP and their face card as they grow their followings on social media and they don't just give that to the newsroom for free?
I really don't know what position I'd even be put in if anyone ever gave me, managing or hiring power, which would be lovely. But I think newsrooms, and I'd love to hear actually from editors on how they approach this, but newsrooms have always had to worry about talent coming and going. That's not a new problem. And really, if talent does well and you reward said talent should stay. As I sort of suggested earlier, a lot of newsrooms, as opposed to putting the reporters who have worked on stories on their vertical video channels, a lot of them literally just put the youngest people in the newsroom because they think, oh, you're a young face, you'll be good making content, as opposed to upskilling the entire newsroom on how to make vertical video, which is what actually should be happening. All of them should be empowered to be making content, in which case there's no longer any sort of exceptionalism about that one member of staff who becomes the TikTok face. In many ways, newsrooms almost shouldn't have a TikTok face because everyone should be making this kind of content. But you're absolutely right that I don't see that really changing in newsrooms in the next year or so. That might change over time. But in the training and sort of consultancy that I deliver, journalists, by and large, are not able to do this because they lack the time and the video skills. Those are the number 1 and 2 things that they say they lack. And that ends up being why it's the one person who does make the time and gets the training who ends up doing it. It's a challenging problem.
In the front here.
Hello, my name is Gilles Bruno, and first of all, I would like to congratulate Mitali for her new position. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Because the Reuters Institute is a gem, and I would love that France had, something like that, but we don't have it. And
France is in all our reportage and research.
Yeah, exactly. No, I wanted to tell you about training of journalists and professional journalists, because you said about skills, about video and all that stuff. And some of them, if you teach them, and if the legacy media give them enough opportunity to be trained, one pass after one pass, we do in our school, we do one lesson, one training which is called parler devant la caméra, talk in front of a camera. And another thing is to be able to take the most advantage of your smartphone. And these two trainings can be kind of useful, and but you have to have a project behind, not only send.
And so are they only an hour, did you say?
What?
Are they only an hour, did you say? How long is this training session?
The training about talking in front of the camera is 2 days.
Okay.
And getting used to the smartphone is 3 days, full days. And it's only a beginning, but it can work. But only if the legacy media, for example, if we talk about legacy media, if they give the space to the journalist to use that training for his work and not to let him forget all the things he just
Absolutely,
got.
and it's not only space, I would also say it's anyone who's done this, you're going to make loads of videos that tank. You're going to make loads of videos that don't necessarily get the results that you want. And that's not always your fault. Some of that, sometimes, that's like baked into how algorithms work. They don't want you going, overperforming every single time. So if the newsroom isn't also allowing room for creative failure, which is what leads to creative success, yes, they're not going to do it either. The best thing a newsroom can do for encouraging journalists to do vertical video is exposure therapy. They just have to make it, and they have to keep doing it.
I see it's 12:57. Shall we squeeze in 2 quick questions so Sophia can take them both? I saw a hand up over here and then over there, the gentleman in the black shirt.
Hi, I was curious to know, in the training you provide, do you also train your journalists to work on their personal branding? Because nowadays a lot more journalists are going online, so they need to kind of differentiate themselves from the masses. Is that something that you think about?
So, yeah, I never use the expression personal brand in any of my training or what I do. And not for any particular reason, really. I talk about being distinctive, like I said earlier, because you're up against so much other content. How are you distinctive? And you're definitely distinctive if you're making a video about original journalism that you did, it's been a story you've been investigating for months. And so I think it's very important, for example, in scripting, that journalists say things like that. That is the way that someone's going to watch your explanation and analysis of a story over the next journalist who might be trying it, or the next content creator who simply copied and pasted a news report and is delivering it like they did it. So that's mainly what I look at. I also, in training, do competitor analyses with people. So I encourage, I help journalists and non-journalists understand how you want to be distinctive, but do you know who's already doing a very good job in the space that you want to be in? Because if you're not competitive to that, your video is not going to overperform and get a following.
And the final question there.
Thank you. I represent mainstream media, TV newsroom, and we started TikTok 1.5 years ago, quite successfully. But at that time, there was a stereotype that TikTok videos and Instagram videos should be short, grab attention in the first 3 seconds. What are your observations? Haven't seen recently that TikTok videos, especially, and also Instagram videos, become longer and longer, and audience wants longer videos on those platforms?
The 3-second thing hasn't changed and will never change, and it was true before the age of TikTok. TikTok just made it even more ruthless. So it was always the case. I remember when I was making videos that would primarily, you'd want them to fly on like Facebook, and I can remember looking at video retention rates. It's always been the case that the first 3 seconds are vital for retaining an audience. The videos, yes, I have been there for every length of all these videos that you just described. I remember when on TikTok, especially when it was more trend heavy, you could get away with making 15-second videos every now and again. I haven't seen the length change for some time in terms of what performs well, and this is still pretty much 90 seconds. Creators can now make longer videos, but they rarely perform better. The only reason that our session times really are getting longer and longer on the apps, yes, partly is because we're being served lots of great content, but they want to keep us in the app longer because that's how they make money out of us. So videos becoming longer doesn't necessarily mean we should be making them longer, is what I would say. Experiment, absolutely, but it's probably still around 90 seconds, the explainers that you want to be making.
Our session time, unfortunately, is not getting longer. So we're going to wind down here. Did you want to make a quick invite when we... Yeah, so let me give you...
I totally forgot, thank you. I've with 2 journalism grants, been able to build an app that theoretically helps journalists make TikToks and vertical video like me. If you want to follow me like the Pied Piper, I am now going to walk into Perugia to Caffè Mazzini, and you are welcome if you want to use a test, this app which is called Safina. You do need an iPhone. It is only iOS available at the moment. If you want to do that, that's where I'm heading now, and you're more than welcome to join me.
You forgot to mention you're promising gelato. Are you still not promising that?
No, I have a core group who are doing this for me in exchange of an Aperol Spritz. If I offered to get an Aperol Spritz for everyone here, I'd be in big trouble. So I can't offer that, I'm afraid.
Warm round of applause for Sophia, everyone. Thank you very much for joining in today.